Now we are joined by Specky favourite, Professor James Allan. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alexander. Nice to be here. Happy Easter to everyone.
Oh yes, and happy Easter to you as well. You had the cover article in last week's magazine with your article, High Courting Disaster, Even Labor Are Panicking. James, the public does not understand why foreign criminals are walking our streets. It's a topic that, whatever the law might say, doesn't pass the pub test. How big of a problem is this for Labor?
Well, I mean, my view is if you look in the last 30 years around the English-speaking world, the judiciary has given itself more and more power. It's certainly true in Canada and Britain. And yes, there have been countries that adopt the Bill of Rights, but the judges adopt an interpretive approach that just by chance, I suppose, ends up giving them more power. Now, Australia has been better than those other countries on the whole, but our High Court is not good. They've been terrible on federalism, and they just make up these interpretive doctrines, in my point of view. So when you think of the federal division of powers in this country, the aliens' power has gone to the feds, to the Commonwealth. So they are supposed to be able to legislate anything to do with aliens. And our High Court, starting in the 50s, invented this separation of powers doctrine. I know a lot of conservatives think it's great, but it doesn't really exist in Canada. It doesn't really exist in New Zealand. It doesn't really exist in Britain. And I don't think it makes Australians any more free or in really intangible terms does anything. But they've used that in the NZYQ case to overrule a precedent from 20 years ago, which was the Al-Kateb case. And it has to do with indefinite detention of people who, illegally, effectively, or unlawfully come to Australia. And, these are some pretty nasty people. They've done some pretty horrible things. And I personally don't see why the minister shouldn't be able to have indefinite detention. I don't think in moral terms it's a problem. This is a very minority view, mine is, in the legal academy. You only have to say the words indefinite detention, and people who didn't say a word during 2 years of the worst civil liberties inroads ever start frothing at the mouth. But, our High Court unanimously overturned the Al-Kateb case. And just to remind you, the majority in Al-Kateb included Justices Hayden and Callanan. Again, I do not think the current High Court today is in the same league as the court 20 years ago in terms of the caliber of the judges. And the majority of them, today's court, was appointed by the coalition. They did a terrible job with appointments. Forget the judges. The entire Australian Human Rights Commission was appointed by the coalition. These are the people who didn't say a word during the pandemic, but now are pushing for a Bill of Rights.
Well,
The ABC top 2 appointments were appointed by, the Morrison government. Again, woefully bad. And so we're in this position where the judges really, in my view, are adopting interpretive approaches, which are making it very difficult to control our borders. And I don't think the actual document or the intentions of the people who created our Constitution warrant what they've done. I think these are decisions that I don't like at all. They're plausible, but they're not ones that I think are really very good.
I think what's really bothering the Australian people is we know full well that China, for example, would never accept a situation where Australian murderers who snuck into Beijing would just be allowed to walk free and be given public money to do so. That would not happen in the Chinese system. And the UK is battling a similar problem, as is the US. They've all got this issue with their borders and foreign criminals not being able to arrest or deport them. James, why is it that Western countries all seem to have this problem where we've got so much effort put into the welfare of criminals and nothing into the welfare of citizens? Is this some kind of twisted interpretation of the human rights laws going too far?
Well, Alexander, I wrote a book about 7 or 8 years ago, Democracy in Decline, where I just argued that the elites were starting to undermine democratic decision-making. And one of the worst actors as a caste or a group, there's obviously exceptions, are the judges. And across the Anglosphere, you see judges imposing more and more limits. It might be they make up an implied freedom of political communication, or they supercharge this, which they made up, separation of powers doctrine based on having separate chapters. And by the way, had the voice gone through, they were going to give it a separate chapter because they knew that giving it a separate chapter triggered the judges to use it on steroids. And so we've got these doctrines that judges are making. And here's, if you stand back and look at it from afar, the effect is they're taking more and more off the Democratic table. You might not like indefinite detention, but if you vote for a political party that wants to authorize the executive to do that, like, did anyone decide that we want the judges to overrule us? I didn't. You didn't. And the problem is that the lawyerly caste used to be 40 years ago to the right politically of the median voter. There's loads of evidence, tons of it coming out of the US and Canada and Britain, because they're often, some of this is public information, which parties you donate to. But the median lawyer today is way, way to the political left, an order of magnitude or more, than the median voter. And so the problem is our law schools are churning out, and I work in them, I can tell you, the law schools are churning out social justice warriors. And those are the people who are appointed to be on the courts. Now, if you think it's bad now, wait till 20 years from now. I mean, just remember, if you want solid evidence in Australia, we have 36, 38 law schools. I can't remember. It's like 3 dozen. Not a single law school came out for no in the voice. 2/3 came out for yes, and about 1/3 were neutral. So they and 61% of voters said no. So they are a hotbed of social justice activism. And today's judges are they're not as bad as that, but they don't have the same sort of views as the median voter. And this is a really big problem around the Anglosphere, and how you actually deal with judges who think, in effect, what they're saying is, in some ways, we're morally better than the voters. And it's really hard to deal with. And you need politicians who are aggressive in trying to rein them back in. But you can see what happened when you look at Netanyahu in Israel. I mean, I don't think anything he was proposing was really controversial. He was basically proposing how Australia operated in the 1990s. And, it was characterized as if he was some sort of a dictator, which is ridiculous.
Well, we know that Albanese is worried about what this High Court decision has meant, because we heard earlier this week that Albanese is going to try a Trump-style immigration ban to give the immigration minister the power to deport people from certain countries, or even ban people from those countries like Iran, Iraq and South Sudan from travelling to Australia altogether, as a way to get around this deportation problem. Is that a step in the right direction, or do you imagine that this kind of new policy is being used as a lip service by Labor, and it's not going to be really used unless there's another media disaster that threatens their leadership?
I do think that. But on the other hand, why hasn't the coalition come out with anything? I mean, forget illegal immigration. We're running the biggest legal immigration ever. Mind you, the coalition also ran massive immigration. And the problem is that we need Dutton to come out and say that if they were to win, they would seriously cut back immigration. Now, one thing that the coalition could propose would be a constitutional amendment to give the federal government the power to indefinitely detain people who come here illegally. How many Australians would vote for that constitutional amendment? About 80%. And would the Labor Party have the cojones to block it? I don't think so. There's all sorts of things they could do if they actually were brave. But the problem, again, is the coalition has 20-year-old advisors who, they've never had a job and they're risk averse. But you could certainly propose a constitutional amendment. And I think it would sail through, whether Labor supported it or not. And you could, while you're at it, you could override the Love decision. Again, the central government, the federal government has been given the aliens power to deal with aliens. And the High Court in Love said, well, that doesn't apply to non-citizen people who claim Aboriginal descent, or claim and are agreed to have Aboriginal descent. This is like a laughable decision. And where is the pushback? We need a serious pushback from the political class. And if that gets Labor to do anything, I'm all in favor of it. But we have to start with cutting back legal immigration. Here's the thing: GDP measures economic activity. It measures spending, sort of. And if you let 1 million people in a year, GDP goes up. But what a lot of listeners don't know is gross domestic product per capita, how each of us are doing individually, is going way down. We have had 2 per capita recessions in the last 8 or 9 years. We had the biggest drop of living standards in decades last year. And so we should just stop letting people say gross domestic product. It's a worthless measure, near worthless.
Well,
And yes, it's a big Ponzi scheme. And we'd like to hear the coalition say, we are not going to talk about gross domestic product. We're going to talk about gross domestic product per person. And we're going to seriously cut back. You know, people used to think we let lots of people in and everyone's standard of living go up. That's not true anymore.
oh, it's never,
You know,
it's never.
economists are admitting it's not true.
It's never really been that true. But look, I'm not going to let you go. I've only got about 3 minutes, but I have to ask you about Donald Trump because two things have happened. One, we've got the court trying to bankrupt Trump with these civil fraud cases. But secondly, we heard yesterday that Trump's platform, Truth Social, is valued at around $8 billion. Now, the left are complaining that he's getting rich again. What do you make of these updates? Is Trump going to somehow miraculously survive these attacks on him by, magically getting rich on his social network?
Well, the New York case, when you ask voters in the polls about the New York case, if he were to be convicted, his popularity goes up in the polls because it's so obviously a political hit job. On the other question, of course, you remember that Trump was banned by all the social media. So before Elon Musk owned Twitter, he was banned by Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So he set up his own one, Truth Social. I think he owns about 54%. And as you say, the irony is it's just gone public. What is it? It's now valued at about $8 billion. So he gets 54. So he's worth he's gained something like $4 to $5 billion. So the irony is they're trying to bankrupt him, but he's actually gotten a lot wealthier because of what they tried to do to him. He never would have set this up if they hadn't pushed him off social media. So he has an element of luck, Trump, but he's a fighter. And I know a lot of listeners find him distasteful, but I think the most important thing right now in the conservative world is politicians who are brave, who will stand up to the sort of establishment classes. Basically, everyone who pushed yes was in the establishment, and they don't represent anywhere near a majority. And we need to stand up to these people. And, if the vehicle is Trump, then so be it. So I really hope, the polls are looking good, but again, you have to worry about some of the loose voting systems in some of the states. But, right now, his margin in the polls, he's ahead of the margin of sort of loose voting regulations. So they'll be worried. The Democrats will be worried right now because I think if they held the election today, Trump would win. There's a lot of time. 8 months is a lot of time. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But, the clock is ticking.
Well, at least
it's going to be one of the most enjoyable mornings ever if Trump wins in November.
I just thought it was so funny.
Maybe he'll take up drinking, Alexandria.
I just thought it was so funny that, they were trying to bankrupt him, and just as they think they're going to make sure that he's got no money, he just miraculously finds a fortune out of thin air, which only exists because he was hounded into censorship by the same people who are now trying to destroy him. I mean, they are making a
$4 billion.
And apparently it's still rising. So it could even be more than that. It's going crazy. But look, I have to wish you a very happy Easter. Of course, it's Easter this weekend. So thank you for joining us here today, James. And thank you for your articles. And we'll keep an eye on Trump.
Oh, we should all do that. You can tell me and all the viewers what you're giving up for Lent, Alexander. We'd love to hear what you're giving up for Lent.
I am giving up Albanese for Lent. I'm not going to watch anything that he does or listen to or read anything that he said. That's my sacrifice for this period.
What a sacrifice. What a sacrifice. You are some woman. Thank you for that sacrifice.
I'm doing it so that you don't have to, James. You can keep in touch with him, but I refuse to.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend.
And happy Easter to everyone out there, too.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.